Okay, well, thank you for coming this evening. I had no idea if we'd have a whole mess of parents but this is great. So this is why we're here, the eighth grade trip and the unique precautions that we're going to need to take because of our COVID environment. And so the whole purpose of this meeting is to make sure that we can inform as many families as possible before the school has to make a decision to go or no go, right? We'll talk about it in a little while, but there's a point in January where we have to make a decision, and once we start making payments to the tour company, we can't get that money back, right? So we want to make sure everybody is fully aware of all the expectations, so you can make your best decision on what you want to do. So I'll go over this. I would appreciate if people would hold their questions till the end, just jot them down or remember whatever. And then we'll do a whole question and answer piece at the end. Chances are some of your questions might get answered by the information we're going to share. So we're going to just go over the trip. We'll go over the itinerary, what the kids are going to be doing while they're gone, the safety and security measures, which there's more than just the COVID stuff. And then we'll do the questions and answers. So the trip is open to eighth graders that are enrolled at the time of the trip. We've had some situations in the past where at no fault of their own, kids have had to move during eighth grade. They want to go on the trip with us, and we just can't do that. So it's for the kids that are actively enrolled. There's a whole litany of things why we can't take somebody that doesn't belong to the school. So we'll be leaving early on Tuesday morning, like the buses pull out at 6 o'clock in the morning. So that means everybody has to get here by 5:30. So that way we can make sure all the luggage is out of the building and onto the buses before we leave. And we won't be getting back until late Friday evening. I think it's optimistic to be back at 11 o'clock. It's sometimes as late as 1 o'clock. It all depends on what the traffic is coming out of New York City and coming up from there. And what we normally do is it's the state line. No, we're in Manchester. We have the kids text their parents to let them know when we're turn on the 101, and that kind of gives everybody enough time to get here, and we've never had an issue around that. The cost of the trip is directly related to the number of people that go. So the more kids that go, the better. It lowers the price. Right now, we've got cost estimates from the tour company that if we have 80 kids go, it'll be about $717 per student. If we have 70 go, it's $760. Once we get below that, it gets kind of tricky because one bus is 55 people. So we can drop down to 50 and have a full bus. But once we get over 50, because we have to have one chaperone for every 10 kids. So a 55 person bus is 50 kids and 5 adults. Then we have to go to 2 buses. And that's going to jack the price back up again. You know, this is based on 4 kids in a room and 2 buses is what it's calculated on right now. So that price will fluctuate as we get the final determination of how many kids are going to actually go. And there we go. So the second payment, it says in the paperwork that you got that the second payment, I think, was January 17th, but then we got a letter from the tour company saying that they had to have a $3,000 deposit by January 15th. So we got to back that up a couple days. So it's now going to be January 13th. We need to know, we have to have signed permission slips and the first and second deposit done by the 13th, and that will give us a really clear indication of how many kids are going to go. We can then share a better cost, exactly what it's going to cost. Because once we make that $3,000 payment, it's gone. We'll never get it back. That's part of the contract. If for some reason we aren't able to go on this trip, we will come up with another class trip similar to what we did last year. We'll do, we'll look into a number of different things. The kids last year had a great time when we went whitewater rafting up in northern Maine. That trip was just an overnight. We could do a 2-night trip up there. They have more than enough different activities to keep the kids busy. Our kids were busy from the time they landed, got off the bus until they got on the bus the next day. So, you know, that company is just, they put it together just for kids. So there's other alternatives. And as we get into this, it's the 11-hour drive to Washington DC if you have to go pick up your kid. I mean, that's the hard piece. So Monday, we leave, we'll spend the majority of the day, Monday was drop off baggages. We go through everybody's bags. The suitcases come in, they're all inspected to make sure there's nothing in them that shouldn't be going on the trip. Unfortunately, sometimes that does happen and we just take it out. And then on Tuesday morning, before we get on the bus, the chaperones will go through any carry-on baggage, you know, backpacks, that kind of stuff that's going on the bus. Just to make sure things aren't going on the bus. Keeps everybody honest. Leave about 6. The trip down to Washington takes about 12 hours with stops. There's 2 times that your kids have to have money, and that's the bus ride down and the bus ride back. They have to be able to purchase lunch on the trip down. We stop at like 3 different rest areas on the way down. And the second one is usually our lunch break. So the kids will need money for that. It's always a good idea if your kids don't have a good idea of how to manage money, to teach them between now and then. I remember the first year I went with a group of 8th graders, one of the kids spent $80 on the first rest stop. Had to have a pair of knockoff Oakley sunglasses.
A lot of parents in the past have put like 4 envelopes, one for each day that we're going to be gone, and put a little bit of money in each of them so that they know once that day envelope is used up, that's it for the day, wait till the next day.
So that's always and then the other time the kids have to have money is on the bus ride back for dinner. We stop in Connecticut, Southern Connecticut at a mall to have dinner on the way back. We'll get down there. The bus takes us directly to a restaurant. We have dinner. The tour guides meet us at the restaurant. There'll be 1 tour guide for each bus. From there, we go to the National Mall, and we go to the inn near the Lincoln Memorial, and we do several of the war memorials, the Vietnam War Memorial, Korean War Memorial, the World War II Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial. Yeah, sometimes, some years we are able to make it across to the Jefferson Memorial as well. But it's a late evening, so it's beautiful. All those sites in the light, under the lights. And then we get back to the hotel at like 10 o'clock, check in. Usually the kids are tired enough so that they just want to go to bed. The chaperones make sure all the kids are in their rooms. They're all settled, and then we go through and tape the doors, which is just a piece of masking tape on the outside. So if they decide to open the door, we know they've opened the door. And the kids are really great about it. They don't open the door. They'll call the chaperone and say, they need help, and somebody will go to the room. There's also security on each floor that the kids are on, and they're up all night to make sure that there's no horsing around in the hallways, or if kids come out of the room, they know to contact the chaperone rooms if that happens. But we've very rarely, if ever, have any issues with kids coming out of the rooms because they know they're not supposed to. And either the principal, the assistant principal is with them, so they don't choose to make bad choices most of the time. And the security's in the hallways from 11 to 6. Wednesday, we get up, breakfast at the hotel, get on the buses. This trip is a little bit different than we've done in the past, primarily because the Capitol building may or may not be open. Normally, we go to the Capitol building and do the tours there, it's an amazing opportunity for the kids. We've met senators as they're going to different places, as they're walking through the rotunda, we're doing tours, that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, the tour folks don't want to schedule us for the Capitol building if, in fact, we can't get into the Capitol building. And then we wouldn't have tickets to get to other places. So they're kind of hedging on a sure bet by not having us go to the Capitol building this year. So this year, we're going to be going to Mount Vernon, and we'll have lunch in the cafeteria at Mount Vernon before we get back on the buses to go back to the Washington Mall and visit a number of the different museums as part of the Smithsonian. Normally, we would be at the end of the day, into the afternoon when we go to the museums, we would go back to the hotel, give the kids a chance to jump in a pool, change up, and then take the bus to the river cruise. But in order to keep costs down, we selected a hotel that's a little bit further out of the city. So this year, we won't be going back to the hotel. So we'll spend a little bit more time at the Smithsonian museums before we load the bus to go to the river cruise. The river cruise, that depends on which ones the tour company selects. It's a number of different schools on the same boat, other middle schools, high schools, and the kids have a great time. They have a wonderful buffet lunch, dinner, and they have live music for the kids to dance, and they get to move around. And usually there's a sky deck on the ship. The kids can go up and watch the waterfront along the Potomac River. Jump in if there's anything you want to add. So Thursday, again, we'll get up. This year, we're going to be going to the International Spy Museum and Madame Tussauds. We'll have lunch at Union Station, which is kind of a neat place. That the underground level of the Union Station is a huge food court. And then there's 3 stories of shops. And kids we spend probably an hour and a half there, and the kids really enjoy that. From there, we'll be going to Arlington National Cemetery, where we'll get a guided tour through the cemetery. And the tour guides are amazing, as well as our own guides will be with us. We'll go to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier so they can experience the changing of the guard while we're there. That evening, we'll be headed to Baltimore, which isn't really that far away, and the kids will be able to take in a Major League Baseball game between the Twins and the Orioles. And again, get dinner at the game. So all the meals while we're there the kids will either get food vouchers or there'll be a sit-down meal. So at Union Station at lunch, there'll be vouchers for lunch, and the vast majority of the vendors in the food court all take those vouchers. And the same thing at the ball game. There'll be vouchers for the vendors that are in the stands. On Friday, we get up in the morning, another early morning breakfast, load on the buses, head to northern New Jersey. The Liberty State Park is actually in New Jersey. We load the ship there, and it takes us out to Ellis Island. Depending on the amount of time, we may or may not get off at Ellis Island. At the Statue of Liberty. Most years we're not able to, but then we'll go to Ellis Island. The kids will have an opportunity to go through that. Again, an amazing historical opportunity, and it just, the way they have things set up there, it's very informative and enjoyable, and kids have a great time. We'll leave there around 4 o'clock, and again, we have to go around New York City to get home, and that's depending on how the traffic is on a Friday afternoon. That in New York City, that kind of determines what time we get home that night. And again, we'll stop usually in Connecticut and have dinner at a food court. Kids will need money for that as well. And then we'll get home about 11 o'clock at night. So that's the whole itinerary for the trip. I already talked to you about the luggage being checked here on Monday. So we really need the kids to either you drop off the luggage in the morning, or the kids bring it, however you want to do it, but it needs to be here at the beginning of the day, because over the course of the day, our staff go in the conference room and go through each bag, and it usually takes all day to get that done. And that's the bags stay in the conference room all night, and then in the morning, we'll create a chain with the kids, and we'll hand them all out and get them out to the buses. It goes pretty quickly once we get the kids organized. We remind the kids, we'll have meetings with the kids before the trip. They'll have an opportunity to meet their chaperones and who's in the groups and rooms they're in and all those kinds, and we'll talk about the expectations over the course of the trip. And basically what we tell them is, if it's not okay in your classroom, it's not okay on the trip. It's because school rules and district policies are in place 24/7 while we're gone. Chaperones, we'll have at least one chaperone for every 10 kids. And most chaperones will set up a group text so that we can communicate with each other throughout the trip. Sometimes kids will be, like in some of the museums, we always make sure kids stay together in minimum groups of two. So we're going to a museum, everybody stays in that museum, and then we'll have check-in time. So if we're going to be at a museum for an hour, halfway through, we'll have the kids all meet in a certain place, like the Natural History. There's a huge woolly mammoth. We all meet at the woolly mammoth at a certain time and then check in and send the kids back off to explore some more. So those are the kinds of things we'll do. But when we're moving around, we all stay together in a group between buildings and attractions and those kinds of things. Talked about security guards already. Because it's a federal mandate, just like on our buses here, school buses, we're going to be using our tour buses aren't technically public transportation, but they do follow under that CDC mandate of masks. So we have to be masked up the entire trip. Well, all the time we're on the bus. If we're just going from a short distance to the 11 hour, everybody has to wear a mask on the bus. And then if we're at different locations down in DC, that those locations require masks, everybody will have to wear masks. So that's not a debatable thing. And the kids are great. We haven't had too many problems when we did have the mask mandate at the beginning of the year, and the kids are great on the bus for the most part. The other piece that we'll be following is the reopening plan, and this is where some of the things that we want to go in more depth, and that's one of the reasons Monique's here to help us understand some of those things. So basically, our reopening plan says that we follow whatever DHHS says we need to do at that point in time. And so that's what we're following right now when we have kids that test positive at school, kids that have to be quarantined because there's somebody positive in their household, those kinds of things. We strongly recommend that you and your family consider having the kids go on the trip to be fully vaccinated by the time we leave. It's going to save, it could save you a trip to driving to Washington, DC. And Monique will explain that in a minute. We are going to require that everyone have a PCR test 48 to 72 hours prior to the trip and bring the negative test results with you so the kids can get on the bus. If we don't put these precautions in place and there's one kid on the bus that tests positive and they're on the bus for 11 hours, that's going to create an environment where we're all packed together, that depending on different people's situations around vaccination, may or may not require a quarantine when we get to Washington, DC. And that would be awful, right? We don't want that to happen. So the best insurance would be for the kids. We're not requiring you to vaccinate your kids, but it's going to be a really good insurance policy for everybody that is going down there. We also need to make sure that the kids can be tested. Monique will be with us. She's been trained. She does the testing. We'll have our own person to be able to do testing while we're on the trip. We won't have to rely to go to the dock in the box that's nearest the hotel or whatever location when we're down in Washington, D.C. We can, if someone becomes symptomatic, we can do the test right then and there. And if we do have the unfortunate situation where somebody tests positive while we're away, the sooner we can determine that and figure that out, the quicker that we can isolate that person from everybody else so that everybody else can continue on the trip. That's our hope. So this is the part I'm going to turn over to Monique because she's the one that's going to get it right and I'm going to screw it up because it changes all the time. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
So we put some safeguards in place. I've been working with the Department of Health and Human Services as well as the CDC. We are going to follow the same guidelines, and I have the paperwork here just because I'm going to throw a lot of information at you, and so afterwards you guys can pick that up if you want. If we're on our trip and we have rooms with 4 kids per room, If one person in that room becomes positive, anybody who's in that room that's unvaccinated has now been classified under a household contact. And the definition is on that paperwork, because they are sleeping in the environment with a positive person. So unfortunately, they are going to have, the positive person is going to have to isolate in one room. And then anybody in that room that's unvaccinated, unfortunately, has been in contact with a positive person. It's considered the same thing as a household contact, as you're sleeping together in the same room. And that person's going to have to be isolated as well. So that person will not be able to ride back on the bus. So that person's going to have to be picked up as well. If you are in a room and you're vaccinated and a positive person happens, then you fall under the guidelines that we fall under right now. Even though if it's in your household, if you're vaccinated, you do not have to quarantine. We are going to monitor that person, make sure that that person is not getting sick. If they do get sick, we have the rapid that we can test them with. If the rapid comes back negative, they're vaccinated, they're fine. They don't have to go anywhere, they don't have to quarantine. So that's why we're saying how important for this trip being vaccinated is going to be, because it's going to be the difference between your child being able to continue with the trip or you having to come and get your child.
But we can't do a random test on the ones that are unvaccinated that aren't showing symptoms to prove that they don't have the virus. We're going to segregate the vaccinated and the unvaccinated.
But we can't be on the bus together.
We're not going to segregate anybody.
You just said, Bob, that if that child is unvaccinated and comes in close contact with a positive, unvaccinated needs to be removed, but the vaccinated can stay. You blatantly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right,
that's
we're
the
not,
guideline.
we're not segregating vaccinated and vaccinated as we go on the trip. We're not gonna segregate rooms.
So in a room, and
Yeah,
one kid gets sick,
yeah, we're following,
it's gonna get quarantined.
yeah,
Instead of being tested and go, oh, okay, they're not positive.
because the rapid,
The vaccinated can stay and be tested and be, oh, they're not positive, but they can't carry it?
because the rapid test has to be 3 to 5 days after the exposure. You can't,
But then the unvaccinated needs to be quarantined too, because they can still carry.
But even if you're in your household right now today, not even mentioning this trip, if you're vaccinated and mom is positive, that child does not have to stay home if she's vaccinated.
Common sense in a household says you stay home.
Right, but we have no place to keep these kids while we're out there.
so we're following the Department of Health and Human Services guidelines. That's what the reopening plan says we have to do, and that's what we're gonna do. And it's, you know, we have all the information here as far as what
We
we,
answer for the private hotel rooms, so we don't have to put this.
It would be the same.
I don't want to sleep with somebody if they're positive. I don't want my son in there and then he has to go home even if he's negative or whatever because he's
Well, now we're out.
unvaccinated.
so this is, yeah, this is exactly why we're having this meeting tonight, so that we can make sure that everyone's fully informed.
I would rather pay for my son to have his own room than get sent home because he's unvaccinated. That's not right.
Or because we're in this situation we're in, why don't we pick a different trip?
If he's staying.
Pick a what?
Pick a different trip.
Well, that will be an outcome that will be determined by the number of people that decide their kids are gonna go in January. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Because to me, it makes more sense if we're in a situation where it's causing conflict. Why wouldn't we just say, okay, let's do something that's much more doable and much more agreeable for everyone?
So regardless of what trip it is, these same guidelines are gonna be in place. Whether we go to northern Maine to do whitewater rafting, or we go to Lake George, wherever we go, it's gonna be, they'll be closer.
The likelihood of somebody testing positive on a 2-day trip versus a week trip? And now I'm gonna drive 12 hours because you said, oh, she's unvaccinated, but the vaccinated can stay. But I'm gonna drive 12 hours because she's unvaccinated. It's not gonna get her because,
Well, anybody who's positive, whether they're vaccinated or not, are going home.
right, but you said that if the person is vaccinated in with a positive person, that vaccinated person can still go on the trip and do whatever.
Just like they can attend school right now.
But they can pass it to everybody else on the trip.
They
The other
can,
unvaccinated person, even if they're not in the
Get
room,
vaccinated.
sleeping room, that
They can still
vaccinated one
pass
is
it
gonna
along.
pass it to everybody.
They're still a carrier.
There's no difference, there is no difference.
Okay, So again, we're following what the Department of Health and Human Services says we have to do, and that's what we're doing right now. And again, that's why we're having this meeting, so that we can make sure that everyone's fully informed.
Right down the middle.
Go ahead.
I'm just curious, come January 13th, do you know what your guidelines are between the go and no-go? Like what's gonna dictate one way or
Well,
another?
If we only have 40 kids that are going,
Okay, so a count, but
Yeah.
let's say it's not the count, like the state status, or if we're on high alert, if we're this, we're that, like what?
We are currently in high substantial alert right now.
there's more positive
And the
cases in the state of New Hampshire
CDC
than there
may
have been
change
before.
the guidelines as we go.
So, just asking that, so is it just a kid count? That's the no-go?
Yeah, I mean, it's parents' decision on whether or not they're gonna send their kids, and whether or not we have enough students to make the trip cost effective, right? Because the cost of the trip is divided by the number of people that are actually going.
What happens if, say, May 2nd, right, we're supposed to leave May 3rd, May 2nd, our district goes on a high alert, we get locked down, we can't go anywhere, what happens to the money?
Well, so,
We have insurance.
well, we don't have insurance, but that's one of the
It's
things.
available.
Yeah, so the other thing is we're strongly recommending that families take out not life insurance, COVID travel insurance. And Abby Nieves is our class advisor. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here tonight. Her aunt passed away and she's at a wake. So she did a little research. So here is just an example. It's 2482. And in this sample insurance, it's 100% coverage, up to $800 of cost. And if there's a trip interruption, which what we're talking about would be the case, it's 150% reimbursement, so $1,200 reimbursement because of the cost of you having to go to Washington DC to pick your kid up. So for an extra $25, parents could choose to do this as well. But, so these are the different scenarios. And again, I'll share this slide set out with with all the parents in 8th grade, as well as the handouts that we have. So that's the information that we have at this point in time, and we've already answered some questions, but I'd be more than glad to answer more. Go ahead, Kelly.
The 72-hour PCR test prior to, would you be optional to have the schools do the testing for us instead of us having to go out and get it done?
Well, unfortunately, we're on vacation that week before.
Yeah, it's,
Okay, I was like, yeah, hold the clinic and
Because I would have definitely done that.
yeah, if it wasn't the Friday of April vacation, then that would be a real possibility, but many of us won't be in the area. We'll have to figure it out.
After vacation, or people are gonna travel.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
On vacation, or people are traveling that week, and then,
Oh,
and who knows?
so that is unfortunate. The 8th grade trip historically has been the week after April vacation, and the tour company we've been working with, they already, before, we haven't paid them anything, but they've already started planning for the trip. They sent us the dates. And so I don't know at this point, we'd have to contact Rob. Tracy Norris is our former 8th grade class advisor, and she's run this trip a number of times. She was able to log in with us. Tracy, how flexible would Rob be around changing dates from your experience working with him?
It probably won't be a problem, only because we're so far out still. I can check with him tomorrow and see if there's a possibility of that. We could move it out a week. I think. I mean, it depends. It depends on what's going on down there. How many schools are going? I don't know if there's a lot. So I can check with him tomorrow. I can certainly email parents if it's something we can, if we can change the date, then certainly we can notify them.
And we most likely would be able to do a PCR clinic here at school the Friday before, if we were in school, if we moved that out a week. The issue is when we get down, once you get further into May, A, it gets a lot warmer in Washington DC, and B, it gets a lot more busier. Even the week that we go that first week in May, there's tour buses everywhere. And sometimes the drivers they have to they're not allowed to double park or anything like that. They're driving the whole time we're doing stuff. They can't stop until they come back and pick us up.
And sometimes it's that police convention too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So that may be an issue as to why we have it on certain weeks instead, because I know there's a big police convention. Usually when we're leaving, they're starting their convention week. So,
Mhm.
so, that's absolutely something we can look into. That's absolutely something we can look into.
I'm happy to do that.
Go ahead.
Why, okay, why are we going if not everything's gonna be going? Are we doing something no local or we know the guidelines? Because if there's a chance to be shut down.
The only thing that we're not sure about is the Capitol building, whether it'll be open, and that's because of their security, and things that have happened at the Capitol, they keep putting up the barricade fence around the Capitol and taking it back down. I can't imagine what it's costing our taxes to do that, because it's a huge complex that they put that steel fence around. So because of the things that have been going on in Washington DC and over the last year, Rob, the manager of the tour company, has recommended that we don't plan on going to the Capitol building just because it could be open, it might not be open, and it would be too risky. Everything else is open fully. That's the only piece of the trip that we know that may or may not be able to be part of the itinerary. Good question, though. Yeah.
I'm assuming if a child tests positive in that 3-day window, they lose out all the money on the trip then too.
Well, yeah, that's why we would recommend
Yeah.
the travel insurance. Go ahead, Brady.
So for those that might want to just make an easy decision, what do the kids do in school that week that don't go on the trip?
So every year, we have usually about 20% of the kids that stay behind. And some of the 8th grade faculty stay behind each year. Megan Matulowicz usually leads the group that stays behind, and she has several different activities that she does with the kids. There's a couple day trips that they take. One of them is the Gundalo on the Piscataqua River, and the kids absolutely, they get a chance to sail up the river, and they actually get to help pull the sails up and those kinds of things. It's a wicked history lesson. There's one of the other ones they've done is gone up to Polar Caves, and some of those kinds of things while we're gone.
It's not normal school.
No. One year, they set up an arrangement with the Historical Society here in town, and they actually got to learn a lot about the history of the town of Raymond through the Historical Society, visiting there's some pretty famous people that are in some of our graves. And so there's a lot of different activities, and it's all historically related, because this is really about U.S. history. That the whole purpose of this trip. And the kids are learning about U.S. history in their history class, the social studies class. So that's primarily why we do Washington, D.C.
Number 2, how many kids do you have in the ballpark that don't go because they can't afford it?
Relatively few, because of the generosity of a number of different benefactors. We always, when we get to that point, we check in with kids and families discreetly to find out if the reason they aren't going is because of funds, and then we reach out. And we very rarely had anyone go that isn't going because they couldn't afford to go. Other question? You had a question, ma'am? Okay, go ahead.
So the kids won't be going into the 7th grade classroom. It'll be if they stay behind.
No.
That's the impression my son was like, I'm not going in the 7th grade. Like, I'd rather-
No, the 8th grade kids are together with the 8th grade faculty that stay behind. Yeah. No.
Horrified.
No.
God.
No. The kids that stay behind have a really enjoyable week as well. not the same, but, we do, Megan does a really nice job of putting together an itinerary for the kids that aren't going on the trip. Other questions? Okay, so we will, share out yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Do you know if you need vaccination cards anywhere that you're going to?
I don't know that. Did you catch that, Tracy?
I did not. Can you
Okay.
repeat that?
Yeah, so, when you touch base with Rob tomorrow, find out if any of the locations that they've selected as itinerary, stops require vaccination cards.
Yes, I will.
Okay, thanks.
When you said the kids who are not vaccinated versus the kids who are vaccinated, I mean, do you have copies of them? I mean, how do you know who you need to segregate?
Yeah, people have been sending them in. When kids have gotten their vaccines, they've been sending them in, so we're putting them in their health file.
That's parents' choice whether you want it. We obviously don't require it, but many families are sharing that information with us.
But for the trip, we
Yeah, that's what it's require us to share it with.
But they also be considered the vaccinated child, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Right, well, we obviously,
and that's it.
Yeah.
Right now, that's still a fluid document. No one knows what's going to happen. I mean, they could change it completely. There has been talk that people who have had COVID right now, that's a 90-day window that they consider people safe. Now they're talking about, when we met with Ben Chang last week, he's the head of Department of Health and Human Services. They're saying that maybe having COVID itself is only 60 days of complete coverage. So everything is fluid in there. It could completely change. It could stay the same.
school nurses are meeting with Dr. Chang on what?
Every other Wednesday.
Yeah, every other Wednesday afternoon on teleconferences. Any other questions? So
I have a quick question.
again, we will share the information, the slide. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
On the-
so if you don't make a decision by January 13th, can you still opt into the trip after the fact? I'm going to be honest, there's a lot of uncertainty here. There's a lot
Yep.
of risk. Right now we're in a high state. Like, it's kind of hard to make a choice now about a trip 5 months out from now, right? So, if we don't make a decision today, some of the parents, are we able to opt into the trip, maybe say in February when things look much different and there's more clearer guidelines and things are more concise, and then just pay whatever that balance is to be up to speed with everyone else? Is that a possibility, or is it, if you don't make a decision by January 13th, then you're out?
So, to be fair to everybody, we need to make a decision based on the number of students that will have been confirmed that are going on the trip, because we have to come up with we have to sign a contract with the tour company, and the cost is based on the number of people that we tell them that are going to be going at that point in time, as well as we have to pay that $3,000 deposit, which is non-refundable. That's the part that, everybody needs to understand is, once we start making payments to the tour company, we can't get that money back. They're starting to pay for baseball tickets. They're paying deposits to the premier bus lines. They're booking out 2 of their buses for that week. They're booking drivers, all those kinds of things, so that they're not sitting on the money. They're starting to spend it on the different things. They're putting deposits on the hotel rooms, all those kinds of things. So that's why we really got to make the decision in January whether this is a go or no go. Go ahead.
I was just thinking mathematically, you said you need a $3,000 deposit, but if somebody backs out a few days later, we've given up $350 and that deposit was like a $50 per head count. So you lose the $350, but you only had to put a deposit for all the kids at $3,000. Like, why wouldn't we get the remaining back and just keep whatever was already used? Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, the contract is pretty clear that once we start sending the money to them, it's not coming back.
Okay.
Go
What
ahead.
happens if a child tests positive in February, April? They're going to continue or potentially continue to test positive. Are they going to still be able to go on the trip? Because
If you're doing the PCR, it will not show up as positive. It hasn't been.
what, 10 days out, right?
After 10 days, after 14 days, they're finding that people are not testing positive. With a rapid, they will, but with the PCR, they don't. And that's what they're using for testing.
Correct me if I'm wrong. The rapid test, a positive is a positive, a negative is not necessarily negative, whereas the PCR is much more accurate both ways.
Because the rapid is for right now. That's how I try to tell parents. The rapid is for right now. I have symptoms right now. The rapid will show up. The PCR is pretty soon I'm going to have symptoms. It could pick up a small amount of virus in your body that you don't even have symptoms. You may not even have symptoms for a couple days, but it'll pick up that small amount and it'll show up positive.
Is the child cleared at the 14-day mark regardless then to go on the trip?
If they've had,
They make that 14-day mark?
yes,
I mean, even if it came back positive again, technically
if they're past their 14 days.
So even if they test positive again, they can still.
If they've had COVID and we have a positive diagnosis from the doctor, a doctor's office or a PCR from a clinic or whatever, not a home test, but the clinic, then if it's been the 14 days and they're not symptomatic in front of me, then they can return to school, they can return to work, people can return to the hospitals to work.
Right, but you're gonna test them again the 72 hours prior.
With a PCR, it should not show up if they're 14 days out. Statistically, it does not show up.
I think the question might be though, if they test positive 15 days, or say they test positive 14 days before May 3rd. Are they gonna need a negative test before they can go on the trip?
Or is the 14-day window enough to have assumed at that point they've cleared the virus?
The 14 days should be enough.
Okay.
If I have confirmation that from the clinic, Convenient MD, Walgreens or whatever, that they've had a rapid positive and now they're not exhibiting symptoms,
Then they're clear.
they're clear.
Is that assuming a quarantine though? What could you test?
Same word tomorrow.
Is that assuming what?
Is that assuming like isolation for that 14 days? What if you tested positive 14 days before? What's the chance you could be exposed again, say 5 days out?
To have COVID again after?
Be exposed.
So,
Not following.
yeah, so what we understand, at one point in time, earlier in the pandemic, if you tested positive with COVID-19, once your 14-day window was over, the doctors were saying, you probably won't catch it again for at least 90 days. But now that with these new variants that are coming out, now they've dropped that down to 60 days. So you basically have built-in immunity for 60 days.
That's why they're recommending now people that have had COVID to get vaccinated because they're not sure how far that window is. It used to be 90, but now they're finding the data is supporting that people after 60 days have been reinfected.
Even if you have built-in immunity, you already have it, you still have it transferred.
If you what?
Can carry the
If you're a carrier, you might test negative for actually having it, you still can carry it.
But the PCR should pick it up.
That's fine. Yeah. I just play a doctor on TV.
Hospitals won't test patients for 90 days after positive, even with PCR. Mass General Brigham will not test anybody again in a 90-day window.
Well, I think they're changing it to 60 now, but yeah. That's what, when we met with Ben Chen on Wednesday, they're saying the 60-day window.
So we recognize that parents have got some decisions to make and we can't tell you what to do, but we wanted to make sure that you had the information to make the best decision for you and your family. And then whatever you guys decide is what we'll do moving forward. Yes.
I just have a thought surveying the 8th graders and seeing what they feel about going to DC versus going with winter rafting. I don't know if that's opening a really nasty can of worms, but I would be curious what the 8th graders would say.
Yeah.
I would be there.
Yeah, we're not opposed to that at all.
Just something to
Yep, the kids have been,
They'd be like, yeah, let's go, that sounds fun.
the
And they're like,
kids have been,
don't wanna go.
Yeah.
I'd rather do something else.
the kids have been pretty anxious about wanting to make sure that they're able to go. You know, we have, unfortunately, some of our former students that never got an opportunity and they really regretted it. We've had families that their children have lost out on both the 8th grade trip and the Nature's Classroom trip. And all the things we're gonna be talking about with you guys as 8th grade parents, we're gonna be talking with the 5th grade parents about the same things as we're getting ready to go to Nature's Classroom. Again, it's only 90 minutes away, so it's not as significant of having the travel to DC. That's,
I'm sorry.
that's the biggest difference is just the distance we're going away.
Have you guys ever looked into just flying them there?
That would be,
I mean,
No.
it would be nice.
Tracy,
I mean, you can do such cheap tickets now, people are flying so, and all the travel time, the buses, get a bus to bring them to the airport, pick them up from the airport, and, I mean,
Tracy,
Yes.
in the years that you've been doing this, have you ever done the research between the cost of flying as compared to taking the buses?
Honestly, I have not. I've thought
Okay.
about it.
Yeah, I mean, we could look into it.
But the problem being with taking the buses, flying over taking the buses is you then have the cost for the flight on the way down, but then you also have to have buses while you're down there to get around.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm just
So,
curious,
Yeah.
I mean, I have friends that are flying to Florida for $69 round trip. So,
But,
I was just curious.
yeah, we'd have to have buses down
12
there.
hours on a bus, so.
It's not that bad. I wrote the district's,
I did it in 8th grade, I remember.
I wrote the district's net effectiveness plan on a trip down and a trip back. It was very productive time for me.
I was just curious if it would have had a long trip.
It is a long trip. Lots of movies.
You look forward to that 2-hour break.
I'm going to be honest about the bus ride. The bus ride on the way down is perfectly fine. The second half of the bus ride on the way back is torture.
Yeah, on the ride down, they're excited. On the way back, it's like,
Just get home.
Are we going yet? How long? You know, all the typical kid stuff. All right, thank you folks for coming in. We certainly do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thanks for your work.
You're welcome.
Hampstead. Yeah, but it's really just.
All right,